Before we get started, please remember this podcast is for general educational purposes only. We're not providing medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your own healthcare provider about your care. Welcome to Fertility Nurses Unfiltered. 2 nurses, 1 mic, no bullshit.
I'm Ashlee LaRue, fertility nurse and founder of Fertilities.
And I'm Laura Wepler, fertility nurse and founder of Navigating Fertility with Laura.
You got questions, the internet has a lot of opinions, but what you really need is 2 fertility nurses who aren't afraid to tell the truth.
No scripts, no sugarcoating, just honest, evidence-based nurse-to-nurse conversation. So let's get into it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Fertility Nurses Unfiltered. As always, Laura and I are super excited to be with you. Today's episode is one I've genuinely been looking forward to. Today we're talking egg freezing, fertility preservation, owning your fertility, and we're doing it with someone I not only deeply respect, but had the privilege of working alongside at CCRM. Our guest today is Dr. Jaime Knopman. Dr. Knopman is a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist at CCRM New York, and she is the National Director of Fertility Preservation for the entire CCRM network. So it's safe to say she knows her stuff. She's the author of a new book called Own Your Fertility, an absolute must read, and we're obviously going to talk about that. She's a Castle Connolly top doctor and the medical director of Chick Mission, a nonprofit doing incredible work supporting young adult cancer patients facing fertility challenges. When she's not doing all of that and more, she is a mom of 2, a runner, a self-proclaimed coffee addict, and the egg freezing expert we've been waiting to get on this show. So, Dr. Knopman, welcome. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Ashlee, I miss you. And I remember
I
remember when you said you were leaving and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sad. But it's nice to get the chance to chat with you again.
Absolutely. I know. I'm sad too, and I miss you guys every single day. And every chance I get to talk with the New York crew, I make a point to do it. So let's kick things off. I want to start with talking about your book. First of all, congratulations. I don't think I've been able to tell you that face to face. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
How did this come about? What made you decide to write a book? What can people expect from it? Like, let's just start there.
So, Ashlee, after working with me, you know I'm not a quiet person. I'm very loud.
We love
But
it. We're
I
here
said
for
it was
it.
only as loud as the 4 walls of my office, and I saw there was really a need for education because so many people sat in front of me and were in really despair. They would say, "I didn't understand this was going to happen to my body. You know, I'm just so confused." And I thought, well, we need a reliable, well-researched source of information to provide to patients that says, okay, this is what happens in your body, right? Almost like in many ways, like a redo of health class, of sex ed or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. And that was really the part of the impetus. The other part was I had shifted. I used to call myself an infertility doctor, and then I started calling myself a fertility doctor. And I like didn't even think about that did this in my own head. And the reason I did was because I was mostly taking care of women and couples to preserve their fertility, right?
Yeah.
Eggs and embryos. And so I thought, wow, everyone really needs to know about this. And so that was what led me to sort of, investigate how do we write a book? What are the next steps? And then it went from there.
I love what you said about fertility doctor versus infertility doctor, because I feel like the word infertility, like conventionally, I think people hear it and they think I can never have children, right? I'm infertile, like that's it. And somebody put it to me this way a few months ago, like it's somewhat more of a subfertility, right? In most cases, in the majority of cases, we can do something, we can intervene to get someone pregnant. And so infertility sometimes feels like a kind of a final word, like you're infertile and that's it. So I love the word subfertile or just fertility, just calling yourself a fertility doctor rather than an infertility doctor.
And it was also because I went from seeing couples who were trying to get pregnant and were unsuccessful, or individuals, to women and couples who had never thought about having a baby and were actually coming and saying to me, I don't even know if I want to have a baby, but
Yeah.
they wanted to not miss the opportunity, right? So that was a big shift. And the coverage that companies were providing was a massive shift, right? So by companies offering coverage, more and more companies, it allowed women to freeze eggs and embryos at ages and times they were never going to be able to do it.
Yeah. You hit on something else too. The whole sex ed thing, right? Like it's really sad what what we've got in middle school years as far as like understanding our body and our reproduction and all of that. And there's little to no education from there on. Like that's just it. We're just supposed to know what's going on. You go see OBGYNs or other doctors and maybe they're not bringing it up or talking about it. So I think so knowledge is power. Education is absolutely needed. And I think the earlier people can find this information out, they're like, I do have options. I
Yeah.
can go talk to somebody. And it, I don't have to do something, but I absolutely could do something. And
And
it
yeah.
puts the power back in their hands.
Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, the funny part is I wanted the book to be called Wear Sunscreen and Freeze Your Eggs. I was like, that's the most amazing title. Yay, I'm amazing. But then the publisher was like, no. And I was like, what do you mean no? But the point, I do love the title because it is about changing the narrative. It's about you driving the car rather than the car driving you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's really what we're trying to say. And you're right. Like we all learn how not to get pregnant, which is great because teenage pregnancy in this country is to the lowest it's ever been. And that's because we've educated people, right?
Yes.
Like we should mimic what we've done there and say, okay, let us teach you about this. And it's not, I don't think it's because our OBGYN colleagues, they want to do this, right? But they just don't always have the time, the resources, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And we're a team, we're a partnership, right? So I always say, send me anyone who just wants to talk about it. It doesn't mean they have to do it. I'm here.
Absolutely.
My job is to educate.
Absolutely. We just talked about this the other day with somebody else about, I think there's a misconception that if you talk to a fertility doctor, you one are infertile, you two have you have to have been trying to conceive for X amount of time. Like there's this misconception you're automatically going into IVF or treatment. It's like, no, it literally can just be a conversation
Yeah.
and information and know more about what's going on. And maybe we do a little bit of testing and we figure out like the earlier we can maybe do some of this testing, maybe we figure out some of this stuff where you aren't figuring it out in your mid 30s or 40s, like a lot of us when we're trying to conceive later on in life.
Yep. Yep. And I think it's also like, we have a fear of things we don't know, right? Like I joke around that I like have this crazy fear of the dentist, whatever. Because you like, oh my God, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna get bad news and then I'm gonna have to deal with it. And I have 17 cavities. But the reality is putting that off only makes it so much worse, right? So if I actually did the checkups every 6 months, I probably wouldn't have 5 cavities when I go 5 years later, right? So I'm not saying that you can prevent it completely, but what I am saying is if you know early on, there's so many more things you can do rather than if you know later. And that's really like the gist of the book. Also, we talk a lot in the book. I mean, Ashlee, you were here for a long time. Like life does not go as we always plan, right? Like I think most of us think, oh, I'm gonna meet somebody, I'm gonna have a baby, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And like then you're like, oh my goodness, life is circuitous, it is not linear. And that is also like I talk, it's personal narrative. I really am like, I did not expect to be divorced and I did not expect, like so I think we have to sort of take a deep breath and remember that life is messy and whatever we can do to set ourselves up for the future is probably the best way to do it.
That was this week's plug of fertility is not linear.
We say it on every single episode. Someone
episode
says it's not linear, like literally those exact words. So,
Yep.
I mean, at this point, this is, I don't even know how many episodes. It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, this was why we came up with this graphic. Actually, it was so funny. I think it was probably like last summer when we decided on it. We were like, yes. And then it's the male and female signal sort of blurred in. And that was like really, we were like, that is actually the truth. This is life is very, very messy. And the unknown, right? So many people, the reason I think a lot of people get into a bad place when they're dealing with fertility stuffs is because you don't know what the future is going to hold. And you want somebody to say to you, oh, don't worry, it's going to end like this, but we don't know that. And so that makes it really hard.
How do we get those individuals then, people who it's not even on their radar, right? They're not even they're thinking, yeah, sometime in the future I'm going to have kids. How do we get them thinking? How do we educate the broader community to start thinking about their fertility maybe at a younger age, to start thinking about like, hey, I don't know, I might not want kids for 5 more years. Should I consider egg freezing? Because I think it's becoming more mainstream, but
Yeah.
maybe not as
I
much
mean,
as
I
we want.
do think, like, as the mom of two teenage daughters, like, it's hard for me to credit social media with anything, but
Yeah.
that's social media has done a good job, right? Because
Yeah.
they've destigmatized it, they've normalized it. So I think more people sharing their journey, more of us speaking about it is just information is just going to spread like wildfire, and then we'll have changed the pathway for the future. That's what I believe. I don't, there's also an access issue, and we can't ignore that, right? Not every single person has access to these services, and that is definitely not fair, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, not everyone will have the ability to do this, even if they want to. So we have to continue to push to make it more equally accessible to everyone.
And I see sometimes too, like sort of like naysayers out there of why would you freeze your eggs? You don't even know. You haven't even tried. So, like, why are you
Mhm.
spending time and energy and money in your body? And there's so many misconceptions that I'm sure we're going to touch on too that's out there. And it's like, I think it's either in your book or I heard you say it. It's probably both. That it's like, it's almost like insurance, right? Like, nobody buys life insurance like, we're all going to, die at some point, right? Like, we don't buy car insurance because we hope we get into a car accident. It's there if we need it. And I think you've said this, it's somewhere in your
Yeah.
book or you've talked about it.
I say like you put a seatbelt on when you get into a car. You don't want to get into a car accident, but you pray if you do, the seatbelt works. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't always work, right? Sometimes there's faulty
Yeah.
things that happen. Most of the time, if you're wearing it the right way, it will work, right? Most of the time, if you freeze your eggs at the right age, they will work, right? But sometimes they won't. And I always say the flood insurance, like if you live on like a flood zone, and you
Mm.
get flood insurance, it may not pay up when the time comes, right? But you're not going to go without it. So we have to like rethink about how we frame fertility preservation.
Yeah.
It's not saying, I say all the time, it is not a guarantee. It drives me crazy when people are like, oh, I have 20 eggs, so I have 20 babies. I'm like, no, abort, abort. Like, sorry, wrong word to use there, but like, you know what I'm saying? I'm
Yeah.
like, that is not true. An egg doesn't equal a baby, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Human reproduction is incredibly inefficient. So we have to remember this when we think about it. That's why I personally really don't like those egg freezing calculators. I know a lot of people have them on their websites and they're like, oh, use it. But I'm like, we're so much more than a calculator, right? This is
Yeah.
the art of what we do. The art of what we do is assessing the whole picture rather than just saying, oh, I'm 32 and I have 15 eggs and I put it into the calculator. Did it take you 3 cycles to get those 15 eggs? Do you have a family history of early menopause? Like what was what was behind those 15? So yes, I do think like more talk is good, but I also think sometimes we have to remember that we can't predict the future, so we don't know what's going to happen.
I love that you said that about the calculators. I think it kind of just reinforces again this topic of fertility is not linear, right? But I think also about our access these days to tools like ChatGPT or these other AI bots that may do the same thing, right? A lot of it, I think, pulls, number one, we know it pulls information from sources that are not reputable.
Yep.
But number two, it overgeneralizes and isn't taking into account the person as a whole, their medical background, their circumstances. And I love that you put it in the form of like what you do, what REIs do is an art form.
Yeah.
And it really is individualizing it to each person or each couple.
Because that's the thing, like, I love ChatGPT too, trust me, I, like, will be like, "What is this?" But and there are things it's amazing for, but there
Sure.
is still some clinical training, I mean, 20 plus years, right, that go into making this this a science successful. So I think we minimize that thinking a computer can just tell us,
Yeah.
and we wanted to, like, think about how many times, like, people will be like, "Well, I put my beta HCG, my pregnancy hormone in, and then I put the next one, and this is what they told me." I'm like, I know, but they don't know all the backstory of it. So
Yeah.
I get it too. Like I Google everything. I'll be like, oh, is this did I tear this? What is this? What is that? But then I'm like, Jamie, put the Google away and like just be yourself, because remember that you're not an orthopedist and that there is something to be said for that.
Thank you so much for humanizing that, right? I think
Yeah.
sometimes people think that us in the field that are physicians, nurses, right, that we don't do that stuff. I mean, I do it all the time
Oh
and
yeah.
I know I shouldn't, but I still do it.
all the time. Like I'll be like, take a picture of something and be like, let me see what chat thinks that is. And it's just but I will say the chat GPT it is good for some things. So we can't deny that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so many people get stuck on numbers, right? Like how do you like how do you as a physician like work through that? Like I mean, people get stuck on how many eggs do I need? How many embryos do I need? People will ask how many cycles do I need? Like you can predict that.
Yeah.
How do
I
you
mean,
like
I always try and set it up for the long game, right? Rather than the short game. I'm like, I think you need 3 cycles, 4 cycles, and maybe it only takes two. I think, again, like I've compared my whole life to running a marathon. If somebody tells me I'm going to run 13 miles and then mile 13, they're like joking, it's actually 20, you're like, F you, I'm off this course, right? So that's the same thing with
yeah.
fertility. If you say expect 4 cycles and then I'm like, oh, you're done after 3, you're like, amazing, right? So I try and be very realistic. Now, trust me, that has gotten me into a lot of trouble. Like I'm brutally honest, right? And sometimes people don't always want to hear that. So as I've gotten older, I've learned to sort of not sugarcoat it, but understand like what I want to say and what somebody is ready to hear may not be in the same place. So how do I gradually get that person to hear what I'm saying? Because my goal is for that person to have a family, right? If that's what they want. However, we're going to get there. I understand that maybe that person didn't want to use an egg donor or gestational carrier, but I have to slowly get them there if I know that that's the way they're going to be able to build a family. But when I was a junior doctor, I might have been like, oh, you need egg donor. Like your AMH is not good, right? But I didn't realize that like it has to be very gradual as you get somebody there, because that's how you're going to get them to understand what's the best path forward.
Yeah, like meeting them where they are emotionally, where they are mentally, where they are physically.
Yep.
And we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone. It took her 5 years to get to the point where she was like, okay, I guess I do need an egg donor. And, I think she had a situation where she was like flat out told, like, 5 years prior, you need an egg donor. And she just was not ready to
Yeah.
hear it. And so, how do we gently prepare somebody for that
I
potential?
mean, it's like when you get a terminal diagnosis, right? If somebody's like, you may be like, I want to fight, I want to do chemo, I want to do this. And the doctor on the other side may be like, wait, this is never going to work, right? Like, we know that this is terminal. But until you get to that place where you're like, I'm ready, like you're not. And so, how do we guide you? How do we do that without having you waste every penny? Because unfortunately, fertility treatment is not always covered. So, I feel like when you take an oath to be a doctor, it's not just to like it's not like you're a doctor on many other, like a doctor is also being honest and not letting that person waste every penny they've ever saved on fertility treatment that is not going to be successful. That is hard too, because I can see a 48-year-old and say I can't participate in IVF, and then she can go online and like write all these horrible things about me, right?
Yeah.
And I have to be okay with that, because I have to say in my heart, I know I did the right thing. I know that taking that lady's $20,000 is not right, because she's not going to have success. But it's very hard to get there, and to get there gracefully, right? Where someone turns around and is like, I'm not mad at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a balance to it, absolutely. But I personally also love your brutal honesty. It's one of the things I love about you. But I think it's part of it, as taking a step back and working and seeing other clinics now and seeing other doctors across the country and having a bigger, broader perspective of that. It's a lot of people aren't getting that. They are getting the people that are like, yeah, I'll take your 20 grand
Yeah.
and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And oh, yeah, we can do this and this and this and this and all of these extra add ons. And we wonder why there's like a distrust in fertility a lot of times, and why so many people do go and get multiple opinions. Not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but it's like at some point that brutal honesty, we need that. We need doctors to like say more of what they actually believe and what they actually think before people start going down some of these rabbit holes.
Because I also think, unfortunately, and we can't ignore this, fertility is a business, right? And
Mhm.
so people are not, I mean, it's like any field of medicine, right? People are not always reputable, and we sort of rely on them to do the right thing. Fertility is a little more excessive because somebody can do endless cycles of treatment, right? But I think at some point, you have to hope that somebody steps in, whether it's even not, maybe the physician isn't doing it, but maybe it's the nurse who sits with that patient and is like, it's over. It's so hard to get there. But I talk a lot about this in the book, like grief, right? Like grief is a lengthy process, and there are multiple stages. There's anger, there's bereavement, there's denial, and like we as fertility providers, we see this all the time. Think about Ashlee, the patients that
Yeah.
would come in and be so mean, and we would be like, why are you being so mean to everyone?
Yeah.
And now I'm like, that patient's stuck in anger and they don't
Yeah.
actually know how to get themselves to a place where they can be nicer, not nicer about it, but like not mean to everyone around
Yeah.
them. Right. So I think that is it's not easy.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that, especially for us who work in the field directly with patients and realizing sometimes they're not at their they're obviously not at their best selves because of what they're
No.
going through, and that grief is driving a lot of their responses to
Yeah.
things. And I think, I've thought about in the past, I think if some of these people, and maybe they do, right, eventually step back and look back at how maybe they responded to things and think, gosh, if I, that's not the way I wish I would have responded to that.
But even me, like I think about different parts of my life, like, whether it was dealing with divorce or like poor Janet Choi, we shared that wall. She was like, oh yeah, yeah. I'm like, oh Janet, you went through it with me,
Oh, I
huh?
miss Janet too.
Right. But like, there's you're not always the best version of yourself. You would hope as you get older, you mature, you get wiser, right? That's why I have teenage daughters who I'm like, you guys are insane. You do not know anything, right? But like you hope you grow from it. And that's why as a physician, I feel like the physician I am today versus the physician I might have been, 20 years ago is probably very different. I always laugh. I'm like, oh man, if I could be an OBGYN resident again, because I used to be like, you're pushing in your face, not your bottom. Effective pushing is done when you push on your bottom, right? Like, and then I went to deliver my older daughter and I was like, oh my God, I need to go back and apologize to every single mom that was pushing, that I was like, you're pushing wrong. Cause I'm like, this is hard. But
Yeah.
it's like you don't know what you don't know. But I do think sometimes we get, it's hard because people can be so mean to you and you're like, I know you don't mean it, but I'm really doing the best I can.
We've talked about that too, and we've actually had an entire episode talking about it, about how providers are humans too, and we've
Yep.
gone through our own sort of journey in the space, and having to make a phone call, like a really happy, excited phone call, and someone's finally pregnant after years and all, you're super excited. And then you get on the phone with someone and they're screaming at you, or you have to give bad news. And it is just this roller coaster of emotions on a day-to-day basis. And you feel that with your patients.
Yes.
And so it's that aspect too. And yes, years of experience kind of helps with that, but it's like providers are humans too. And we do want the best for you. It's not like an us versus them, which sometimes I feel like that comes across.
Yep. It's funny. I said that would be my next book. Like I talking about it is. I have always had this policy. I don't know if you remember. I only call with the negative results, the negative betas. I call with the bad embryos, this, that, the other.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I let the nurses on my team, currently Blair and Liz, call with all the good news because I'm like, you guys deal with all those hard phone calls. Take the good, right? But the other week, I was like, I may have to take some good, guys. I really need because it wears on you. I'll look at
Yeah.
my phone and I'll be like, oh, that person's not pregnant. I can't. And it's not because I, it's really because I'm so in it with them. I'm so invested. In a way, it would be better if I didn't care. And if I was like, yeah, sure, just have them do another transfer. But like you want it so bad. And I actually think once I became a mom, I wanted it even more for people because I then felt like, oh my God, I know what it's like to be a parent. I know how wonderful it is. I want it for you. It really is breaking my heart that I can't get it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, and we didn't call this out at the beginning of the episode, but you're the first physician that we've had on the show.
Oh,
And so I love that you're saying this because, again, going back to a previous episode that we have, like, I really want patients to understand that feeling like a number. I get it. I think part of it is just the way the system is set up, unfortunately, and the lack of fertility care that is available, especially in areas where there's fertility deserts. But I think it's so important that patients know like how much we do care behind the scenes and how much we're rooting for them and
Yeah.
want them to be successful. And it does wear on us over
Yeah.
time, especially
Oh,
if you've been with someone for
yeah.
years and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought this was going to work and it didn't. It's just
Yeah.
heartbreaking.
And I think also, like, and maybe it's because I'm like a people pleaser, perfectionist, like, I feel like a failure sometimes, right? I'm like, I have failed this person.
Yeah.
What could I have done that I didn't do? And most of the time, there's nothing, right? You're like, I can't. But you feel so badly that you couldn't achieve it for them that you're looking, you're trying to think of every way maybe you could have. And it gets hard. I mean, I really have thought a lot. I guess it's because like now I'm 48, I've done this for a while. I've thought a lot about physician burnout and why it happens. And I think it happens because people really do forget that we're people
Yeah.
and that we are trying our best most of the time, right? And that the negative, like your loss in many ways is our loss too. Now, not to
Yeah.
the same degree, but it really is.
No, I
Absolutely.
mean, absolutely. I'm going to bring us a little bit back to egg freezing. This
Okay.
is such a good conversation, but bring us back a little bit. So the one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough is the overall like attrition.
Mhm.
And yes, we talked about numbers and there's no perfect number like you have X, Y, and Z and you're, guaranteed whatever. So this is totally going to be different for everybody. But can you talk a little bit just about like how you think through as a provider, talking through with these people, like, what their goals are for the future? Okay, we're talking about egg freezing, talking through attrition, and then actually talking about using it. Because I think second part to that question is I think it's out there, and there were some news articles that came out a few years ago that like all these eggs are not being used and blah blah blah. And again, we talked about that being like an insurance policy, and we hope you never have to use it. But can you talk kind of through that process too of like then the use of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in the infancy of people freezing, right? More and more people are coming back to thaw. I think a few years ago we had a lot of eggs, we didn't have as much thawing. I'm definitely seeing a lot more thawing happening now. So I think there's an uptick of that. I think the attrition is, I don't think, sorry, the attrition is pretty steep, right? There is a sharp drop off from follicle to retrievable egg to viable embryo. And back in the day when we first started doing egg freezing, let's call it the early 2010s, 2012, 2013, the technology wasn't as good and the quality of the eggs were pretty poor. I liken it to like I'm a big sports person. So I would say the women who froze their eggs, OG egg freezers, it was a Hail Mary, right? You threw the ball down the field. You're like, if someone catches it, great. If they don't, the game's over anyway. We have no other option. That's where the initial egg freezing was. So when those eggs were thawed, we really shouldn't have been surprised that people did pretty terribly. People did terribly because it was the quality and the technology wasn't what it was. Now the technology is significantly improved, and I say it's like the slant pass, right? You go Mahomes to Kelsey or old school Kelsey, that should be hit most times, right? He should catch that. And I guess old school Mahomes too, because now he tore his ACL. But like, the point is that's a high conversion play. And that's what modern day egg freezing is. So if I have a patient who's 34 and she freezes 12 eggs, I am going to be shocked if I do not walk away with at least one or two good embryos. I really am. Now, there's definitely the patient who I'm like, holy crap, those eggs all did terribly. And likely that person has underlying fertility struggles that we just didn't know, right? Like I have a 26-year-old now, which is crazy because I haven't seen a 26-year-old with fertility struggles in God knows how long. She has a 4-year-old child. They've been trying for 2 years for their second. She gets a ton of eggs and one good embryo, day 7 every time.
Hmm,
Like there's something wrong with the quality of her eggs, right? So
yeah.
if you think about it, this is somebody who could have frozen 20 plus eggs, but she would have then her conversion would have been terrible when she used them, and you would have been like, oh, is that egg freezing? No, it wasn't egg freezing, it was that person, right? Most people are going to do quite well. But if you think about donor egg banks, right? So if I become a donor and if I get 28 eggs and the bank decides to freeze my eggs into packets of 4, right? 7 eggs, 4 packets, there's going to be at least one or two packet that may not have a good embryo in it, right? Just the way it works.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that the egg freezing in the lab was bad. It's just that you're taking all these eggs and parsing them out. So you have to also remember the way to look at it.
Can you talk a little bit? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I get a lot of questions on egg versus embryo freezing. I mean,
Yeah.
I know when we started egg freezing back in the day, it was always thought, well, it's better off to freeze embryos. They do better. They survive the thaw. Like, what are we seeing in the data now on egg freezing?
I feel comfortable with patients doing whatever is best for their life, right? And what I mean by that is I think we used to push embryo freezing because we were more comfortable with it. And this is the thing. If you freeze embryos, you will know the health of your eggs in the year you froze them. So if you extract 20 eggs, you will know in 2026 how many viable embryos. But if you freeze 20 eggs and you don't make embryos, you may not know till 2029 how many viable embryos you have, right? And the problem with that is if you have none and now you're 3 years older and it's 2029, you're like, oh shoot, I wish I would have known this in 2026.
Yeah.
But the worst thing, in my opinion, that you could do is freeze embryos with somebody who doesn't want to have a baby with you, right?
Yeah.
And Amanda Rice from Chick Mission tells this story all the time. I now have gotten over being mortified by it. But like, I called her and was like, I do not think you should freeze embryos with your husband. Like, you guys are not on the same page. And the problem is that if you make those embryos and then that other individual doesn't want to use them, what are you going to do? Nothing, right? You really are going to be in a bad situation. Yeah, if you freeze eggs, you won't know if they're healthy, but they're yours. Nobody's going to touch them.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, I think it's so
very good point.
personalized and pros and cons, right? But I think a lot of times patients are looking to you as a physician and providers to tell them like, "Oh, well, X, Y, and Z, and here's this, and you should absolutely do this." And that's not the answer. A lot of time, it is a very personal decision. You can give that information, and then they get to make that informed decision.
Also, the one thing I would say is that egg freezing is a very hard thing for a lab to do well. Okay. So lab A and lab B may not be the same in how they freeze and thaw. So just because you froze eggs doesn't mean you froze it at a good place that is then going to be good at the process
Yeah.
thereafter. Right. So unfortunately, I don't want to say people have been misled. I don't know if that's too aggressive, but like that every place, every center is equal, and that is not the case. And we have seen, all of us have seen this, where we're like, okay, yeah, no, that's not a great place. And so your eggs may be great, but they may not thaw out well.
And I think I think a lot, and this is over conceptualizing, and I don't want to like call people out by any means, but I do think that people that are going through IVF with a partner tend to potentially do a little bit more research on finding the right embryology lab or finding the right doctor and things like that. Again, I'm overgeneralizing like crazy. I think when you're egg freezing, you're like, I want to freeze my eggs and I live here and I need to make this as convenient as possible for me. And so I'm just going to go to the local. How does somebody like what do you usually tell people? Obviously CCRM is a very, very reputable lab. So you have that obviously, but like how like you have to see this and like how like maybe you get somebody who is getting a second opinion on egg freezing or otherwise and you're trying to like talk about that. Like how do people vet labs? Yes, you use SART data and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
I
but
mean,
for
it's
egg
hard
freezing,
because we know SART data is also very manipulated based on the people who run SART, right? Like, so yes, SART is a good resource. I always say talk to your OBGYN because most OBGYNs that live in your area will know which fertility clinics are better than other ones, right? So like they should have more realistic information to share with you. I think SART is a place to go, but it doesn't always give you the full answer. It's hard, right? Because it's like you're comparing things. It's not like I say, like you take a math test, the answer is 2, right? Like that is the answer, that is it. But a lot of these things, even like embryo grading, right? Like we can all grade embryos differently. There is no like 4 divided by 2 is 2. No way to change that. But that's not always the case with embryos.
yeah, I get that question all the time from people nowadays. It's like, how do I find the right place to go? And I think there's more data out there on like live pregnancy rates
Yep.
and things like that. There's not a ton out there for egg freezing. And I think it goes back to exactly what you said. You're freezing years in advance of potentially using them, maybe never using them. We're not necessarily reporting that data. And there's no way to grade egg quality at this stage.
No
So
way.
we don't know the quality that people are getting from egg freezing from the get-go until you go to actually use them.
Correct. Exactly. You don't. And so I think it's hard to get that information. And so you have to hope that the person you're talking to, your OB, your friends, your internist is guiding you in the right place.
Yeah. Let's go. I have like a few misconceptions that I would love to have you tackle because we all know the answers to these, but I think the more and more we talk about them, I think I've heard you talk about them, but we're going to
Yeah.
talk about them too because the more we get it out there, the more we break down all those barriers that we've talked about. So let's talk about birth control. Couple things with birth control. One, does it completely just screw up your entire fertility? And two, that we get a lot, can you cycle with an IUD?
Yeah, I would say the birth control pill gets a worse rap than the mother of two teenage daughters. Like, everything's my fault at all times. I'm like, I'm so confused. But the same thing with the pill. People will blame that poor pill for everything. I'm like, no, not really. And it's become this like lashing out point. Even online, you read people's posts, and I'm like, oh dear God. So no, the pill does not cause infertility. The pill will mask infertility if I have irregular menstrual cycles or I'm going to have irregular menstrual cycles and I'm on the pill, I won't know that until I come off of the pill.
Yeah.
If I'm in early menopause and I'm going to stop the pill and never get a period again, I won't know that. So, yes, the pill will mask infertility and may delay your diagnosis for infertility, but is not going to cause your infertility. And I think it's something that we really need to get away from and stop like lambasting doctors like, oh, they just put you on the pill because they're lazy and they don't want to figure out what's happening. I'm like, where is this narrative coming from? So, if you're on the pill, we do ask you to come off of the pill for about a month so that your ovaries could wake up. And I say, like, get in the game for the process of egg freezing. If you have an IUD in, whether it's hormonal, copper, whatever it is, getting periods, not getting periods, you can certainly do egg freezing with it. You just have to check your blood so that we know when is the best time to start.
Yeah.
Love that.
Another one we hear a ton, and you probably can already guess, is that if I do egg freezing, is this completely depleting my chances in the future? I'm getting rid of all of my eggs and I cannot have children otherwise
Yep.
in the
So
future.
no, no. And this is funny. My daughter's taking a biotest tomorrow and she was like, what is atresia? I'm like, that is, hello, I've told that to you. What is apoptosis? So atresia is what happens, right? So every month you have a group of eggs that are going to enter the race to be the one egg that's ovulated. Even if you were on the birth control pill and you don't ovulate, you have a group of eggs that are sort of in this running. The eggs that are not used for egg freezing, IVF, whatever it may be, or an attempt to get pregnant, they're just going to die off. We're not hastening you. Sorry, it was like going to sneeze. I had like a sneeze into a yawn. We're not hastening you to menopause, not at all. But people think that incorrectly.
Yeah, I get that question all the time. And I think it's because we're taught in health class, right? That as women, we ovulate one egg every month. And yeah, that's true. But we're not taught that underlying, we're recruiting a group every month. And whether or not those eggs ovulate or one ovulates, they're all dying off no matter what. Like we're going to
Correct.
lose them anyway. So
I'm like, so I was trying to explain this to my kids. This is so funny. They're like if you get allowance and you don't use it, does it get taken back? I'm like, no, 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 no. So I'm like trying to explain this concept, like you could save it for something else, blah, blah, blah. But that I'm like, that does not apply to your ovaries, right? You cannot save it and like push it forward next month unless you do fertility preservation. So
yeah, I think that goes back to the birth control question. I think some people think, oh, as long as I'm on birth control pills, I'm just saving all of my eggs,
well,
right?
people think if I'm on the birth control pill, does that mean I'm not going to have menopause the same time?
Right.
Again, like if I'm pregnant, if I'm breastfeeding, and I'm like, unfortunately, no, no matter what you're doing, atresia still goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other like misconceptions that you have to debunk on a regular basis, you feel like?
I think I say, now listen, we live in New York, so I say like the runway for fertility is LaGuardia, not JFK. Like in LaGuardia, if you don't take off, you go right into the water, right? That people think their runway is endless. Like, I mean, it's actually like sometimes so sad. I'm like, wait, how does this person at 45 years old not understand what is going on here? Right. So, like, unfortunately, we believe that fertility is a birthright, no pun intended, but it isn't. A lot of us are going to suffer fertility struggles no matter how much kale we eat, how much sleep we get, how much we exercise. So, I think that's a big one. Another big one is that it's just a female problem. It's not, it's two
Yeah.
people. And that is something that we need to recognize. So that's a big one. And I would say number three, I think unfortunately there's a lot, we want people to live healthy lifestyles, right? Because a healthy lifestyle is good for every organ in your body, whether that be your brain or your heart, your kidneys. I am not a believer that we can change the quality of our eggs, right? I don't really think there's any data that tells us reliably. Do I tell people everything that's out there? Of course I do. I talk about acupuncture, supplements, dietary changes, but I say with the caveat, I don't know if it's going to help, right? I can tell you about it, but I can also tell you that we see people get pregnant in the most unhealthy situations, on drugs and war and like famine, right? So like I don't know.
I love that you said that. Because Ashlee and I talk about the supplement industry a lot on the podcast and just like selling this false narrative. And the way that I talk to patients about, their fertility and decline with aging, right? We can speed that up. We could smoke, we could do a bunch of dumb things to speed up the decline in our eggs, right? And the quality of those eggs. But there's really, I think a lot of people, as you said, associate, well, I'm living a healthy lifestyle. I'm a marathon runner and I eat salad every day and like I'm, at a healthy BMI. And so, yeah, I'm 44, but I'm like super healthy. So that means all my eggs are healthy too. Forgetting that, just like signs of aging on our face with wrinkles, right? We can't then apply a cream and turn back the clock. Maybe we mask it a little bit, but we can't get rid of them. I guess you can do
100%. Yeah.
Botox. But
No, I mean, I think unfortunately, even the beauty industry has hurt us, right? Because if you think about it, people do like crazy things to their faces and their bodies. And like that doesn't apply to our ovaries. Like, I hope one day there's a longevity medicine finds a way to extend the ovaries. I mean, this is the thing. If you, and I looked at this in the 1940s, the average age women lived to was really like no more than their 60s. Okay. Now it's amazing. It's deep into our 80s, but our ovaries are still tapping out at the same time. The ovaries haven't been like, oh, we're living 20 years longer. So now we're not only going to go to we're 40, we're going to go to we're 60. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So the timeline for your fertility is the same unless you address it. Now, I am not saying that women shouldn't go and like kick ass and go to, med school and law school and live their dreams, but it shouldn't come at the cost of your fertility. You have to remember that so that you don't get there and be like, this was not what I wanted.
Yeah.
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, in the theme here of being unfiltered, can we speak a little bit about ovarian rejuvenation and your thoughts on that? Because just having this conversation, right? I feel like so many women have bought into this idea of ovarian rejuvenation being this like magic wand that we can wave and bring back your fertility. And I've actually, I think they talked about it on fertility and sterility recently, like increased incidence of like ovarian abscess and things like that associated with ovarian stimulation. So I would just love your take
I
on
mean, this is the problem. Like okay, so I think Ashlee was here and I tore my ACL. I felt like my whole life was falling apart. But
Yeah.
and like I couldn't walk, run, anything. So I have like tried all of these crazy, like random supplements, injections, this, that, the other, right? Because I was like, I don't want to have a knee replacement. So what can I do? None of it has helped, let's just be clear, but I needed to do that for me to take back control. So my friend who's my knee surgeon was like, as long as it's not going to hurt you and you're okay spending the money on this, that, the other, try it, right? So I think sometimes for patients I can say, as long as it's not going to hurt you, I'm okay with it. The problem is, and we spoke about this before, it's not covered by insurance. So I'm like, don't go and spend so much money such that when you come back and you want to do egg donation, you are unable to because you've spent all of your money on PRP, right? But like, if you're like, it's not going to harm me, then I'm okay with it.
I think that's a good
Yeah, and
point.
we've talked about that too. I think there's such a loss of control in the fertility journey for a lot of people, and I think there's a lot of things that are relatively harmless if as long as you understand it's not the magic pill. It's not the thing
Right.
that's going to miraculously, but if you financially and personally want to do X, Y, and Z, okay. And I think that's a very realistic answer versus like a very like black and white. But I think, and we've talked about this too, is with the supplement industry and something like ovarian rejuvenation and all these things, it's like, and this idea and concept that's out there of like trimester zero, of like trying to be the healthiest version. Like no one's telling you not to be healthy and exercise and eat right and all these things. Like, yes, we know that can help your body in general and decrease inflammation. We could speak to all of that, right? But I think there's this process of like delaying, right? Like the more you do some of these things and then maybe delay treatment, there are certain things we just cannot overcome.
It's
Age being
funny,
one of
I
those.
feel down on the trimester zero stuff, just like I feel down on the fertility calculators, because I think it sets up this notion like, live your life, do whatever you want. And then for 3 months, just clean it up and you'll be fine. And that's
Right.
like completely incorrect, right? And it also makes you think, oh, the reason my pregnancy didn't work or the reason my
Yeah.
IVF was unsuccessful was because I was unhealthy those 3 months before. So I just
Yeah.
don't like the like conversation or the statement it sets up. I think we need to be healthy for every stage of our body. And like life really is about moderation, right? I mean, you don't have to be like I'm not so smart in saying that. Like fad diets, they don't work because nobody's never like when you thought about the 80s, right? When we didn't eat any it was everything was sugar free, fat free, or whatever it was, fat free.
Yeah.
That was crazy, right? Then the Atkins, nobody ate carbs. Like you're not, it's not possible to live like that. So if you eat things in moderation, that's a way better way to go.
It's like my Pizza
Yeah.
Fridays. We talked about Pizza Fridays on on one of our
Well,
episodes.
actually, this is kind of crazy. We have so many snack foods in our apartment. Like everyone always, we live across the street from my kid's school, but still, like everyone's like, "Oh, your snack drawer." I'm like, part of why I do that because if you're exposed to, if my kids are always around that, it creates less of like a binge mentality,
Like the
right? Where like,
Yeah.
oh my,
novelty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes. And so I'm like, you should be okay. Like if there are Oreos or chocolate chip cookies, like it should be okay that you have one cookie and move on, as opposed to being like, oh my goodness. And it gets us off topic. But the point is like, are you gonna live your life where you're never gonna have a chocolate chip cookie as long as you live? Probably not, right? And that's also like so when we see patients who are struggling with fertility and they come in and they're like, I don't drink, I don't have gluten, I don't, eat anything dairy. I'm like, what do you do? Like, are you even, does anyone like to be around you? Because you become so restrictive and fertility
Yeah.
becomes your whole personality, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, yes, I'm not advocating you going out and having a bottle of rosé every night, but I am saying like if you're out with your girlfriends or your partner and you're going to have a glass of wine and like split a bowl of pasta, like you got to sometimes live.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's all about going back to this sense of like these patients feeling like they need to control every bit of the process. But I do think, and as we're speaking to it, like there is a way to do fertility treatments and still live your life outside of treatment. And I think
Completely.
that is the narrative that I would like to see, social media start picking up on too, is like it doesn't have to be all consuming,
Yeah.
right? There
Because
is
you're so much more than
you
just this
are.
Yes.
conversation, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you are. And I also think like most people who struggle with fertility are in, their 20s, 30s, 40s, not 20s as much, but like for a lot of people this is their first time potentially of having like a real crisis, right? Because we would, most people haven't been old enough to have a serious medical illness. Maybe their parents are still alive, like, so when you're met with this, for a lot of our patients, it's so destabilizing, and it's the first time they've been knocked off their course that their reaction to it is so exacerbated, right? Especially if they don't have a good support system.
Yeah.
I can see it coming from a mile away sometimes. I'm like, oh, this is not going to go well because I can see like who's around, what are we, so it's very interesting. I mean, I say a lot of my job, I'm in many ways, I become more of like a mental health professional even than a fertility physician
Yeah.
because my days are really spent getting couples or individuals through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it there's the control, the perfection, the blame that we put on ourselves whether we do something or don't do something. I'm glad you brought up like the support person too. I think having a support person or people around you even during egg freezing, I feel like can make a huge
100%.
difference. And I don't think we talk about that enough of like I think I see a lot of people that are going through egg freezing or freezing their eggs and they're like I'm just not going to tell anybody. I'm just going to get it done and knock it out, and you can do that, absolutely, it's your prerogative, but I feel like it I don't think people realize how all consuming it can be, even egg freezing.
I do think so. I think that egg freezing has shifted a lot in that it's much more like it used to be this like desperation and now it's empowerment.
Yeah,
And that is because women are doing it younger. So they're not like, oh my God, I have nothing else. I'm just going to do it. It's more empowered. And that has really changed our waiting rooms, right? Because people used to have their like hats on, their sunglasses. They didn't want anyone to know who they were. Now it's like, oh, hi. I have a group of friends who did it together. They were so funny. I've wanted to learn
that's cool.
Mahjong and they all play together. And they're like, Knopman, come, we're learning how to play. And I'm like, oh God, this is so nice, you know. But it's I think we are sometimes we don't like let people in because we're guarded and we sort of feel ashamed. But I do think in most things in our life, the more people like people that we let in, the better. I'm not saying that we should like, put it on social media because sometimes I'm like, you did what? What did you do? You put your pregnancy at 2 days post positive pregnancy on the right. But I am a big believer in sharing with other people what we're going through because I do think it'll make it less frightening.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, I do want to give a shout out to Chick Mission. So I want to talk about this really quickly.
Oh,
I do think a lot of people, and a lot of people that do freeze their eggs, it's for a variety of different reasons, right? We could
yep.
list the whole gamut of it. But I think something that should be talked about more and that is an option to people. Because I don't think cancer doctors, it's not like right in their brain all the time to talk about it.
It's well, I mean, because they're dealing with so many other things. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yep.
Absolutely. But I feel like if you are young or, and you get unfortunately a cancer diagnosis, I think having a conversation about like what does this mean for my fertility? I haven't had kids or I haven't had the number of kids I would like to have or whatever that is for their specific scenario. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, but also like plug Chick Mission a little bit too, so
Yeah.
people are aware of that resource.
Yeah, so I'm so honored. I've been a part of Chick Mission since we started in 2017. Amanda Rice, who is the fearless founder, brought me on as the chief medical officer. Actually, it was so crazy. I think we've reached, she just emailed me. I don't even know how many grants. It's 800, 900, something
Mm.
crazy. And so where it was to where it is now is incredible. Amanda was rightfully so very, very indignant about the fact that she was diagnosed with cancer, had fertility benefits, wasn't able to access them because she wasn't infertile yet. She actually had the benefit. Imagine all the people that didn't even have it. And so she started an organization called Chick Mission where we fundraise to provide women with grants to freeze their eggs ahead of gonadotoxic treatment. And it's amazing. It's like, I feel so honored to be in this crew of women who have really, really worked their butts off to not only provide these grants, but to lobby Congress in different parts of the country for change, right? So I am always very privileged that I'm a part of this group.
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about. I don't think it gets brought up enough that, certain cancer treatments, most cancer treatments will affect,
Yeah.
your ovaries
Most
and your
because
eggs.
most of the time we forget this, but like when we take chemotherapy or whatever it is, that's killing rapidly dividing cells, which our eggs and sperm for men are. And so if we don't address it, many women will be rendered infertile after. And the better that we get at treating cancer, which is amazing, the problem is that then people are left with quality of life issues after. And so I think long gone are the days to be like, oh, we're just going to cure your cancer and that's it. Be happy you're not with cancer. Now people are like, well, I want to actually live my life after. And how can I best do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we can touch on this really quickly too. It kind of gets off that topic, but a lot of people don't have coverage for egg freezing or fertility preservation, right?
Yep.
And so this is an option for those who potentially get a cancer diagnosis. But what are do you know of like some other options that are out there? Like, I mean, we can talk about the lack of insurance coverage and blame insurance for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But
So
like, what other resources do people have that don't have coverage or don't have full coverage or medication, like to have options of fertility preservation?
this is where I do think we've gotten better, right? More and more companies are providing coverage, and that to me is amazing. But it is still, we do not have equity and access across the board. There are not many resources to cover this for you if you don't have coverage from your employee, if you don't have family or a significant other who can pay for it, or if you don't have an option like Chick Mission. But I do think the more that women like us and men, but women like us use our voices to say it is not fair, things need to change, that's how change happens, right? Like I guess this is where I'll leave you. I never will forget, I gave this talk once and this woman stood up and she said to me, "This is not fair." I said, "What's not fair?" She's like, "I couldn't freeze my eggs, why should these women?" And I said, "Well, we stand on the shoulders of the women and men, but the women who came before us, right? Like I'm a female physician because of the badass women that broke those barriers so many years ago.
Yeah.
We're here and we're going to do that for the generation behind us, and they're going to do something for the generation behind them. And we can sit here and lament all day long, well, it's not fair, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, but how can we change it? We may not be able to change it for ourselves, but we can pay it forward. So we're sitting here and we're talking about this. I said to her, "You listen to me talk, maybe you'll go and tell someone who's younger and then they'll do something." And that's all we can do. And so I really firmly believe that.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Dr. Knopman, thank you so much for spending some time with us, talking egg freezing and all things, being real with us, having an unfiltered conversation. For our listeners out there, if you want a badass doctor and you happen to live in New York or are willing to travel to New York, check out CCRM New York and check out Dr. Knopman. Grab her book, Own Your Fertility. It is out now. It is wonderful. I have read it. It is fantastic. It is so informational and empowering. So I highly, highly, highly recommend it. You can follow her on social media. She does stuff with Chick Mission. Just check her out. All the things. Dr. Knopman, cannot thank you enough.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
guys
much.
for having me.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful summer.
Thank
Good
you.
things to come.
You as well.
All right, we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week, everyone.
If this conversation resonated, like, comment, or subscribe, share, send us your questions. Nothing is off limits.
And wherever you are in your journey, know this: you deserve support that's real and human. Never forget to ask your questions, advocate louder, and remember, you're not crazy. Fertility is hard.
That's it for today's episode of Fertility Nurses Unfiltered. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
We'll see you next time.